Hello and welcome to ScaleUp Radio Shorts. This podcast is brought to you by Smart 90, the 90-day system that keeps business owners focused and following through. I'm Kevin Brent.
And I'm Louise Blunt. We are the originators of Smart 90. And on this Shorts edition of the show, Kevin and I dive deep into the archives of the main ScaleUp Radio podcast. We compare, contrast, and pull out the most actionable lessons from recent guest interviews so you can apply them straight to your business.
Today, we're looking back at two absolutely brilliant conversations I had recently. First was with Mike Moorhouse, the founder of Moorhouse Group and Pathmind Labs. And the second was with Anita Čavrag, who is the founder of Firefly and an expert in organizational psychology.
What I found fascinating when listening to both of your interviews, Kevin, is that while Mike and Anita come from slightly different backgrounds, they both zeroed in on the exact same bottleneck for growing businesses, the human factor. Mike specifically operates at the intersection of business strategy and human capability, noting that while the financial side is fairly cut and dried, true execution relies entirely on people. And Anita's entire mission is to cure workplace disengagement, helping founders build vibrant cultures where people actually want to show up.
Exactly, Louise. And a massive theme that ran through both conversations was the evolution of the business owner themselves. Mike told an incredibly humbling story about his early days as a leader. When he was 28 years old and running a group, he lost 3 key people in a very short span of time. He admitted he was arrogant back then, relying on sheer willpower to push the business forward, but he hadn't invested in understanding how to actually develop people or foster a good environment.
And that perfectly mirrors what Anita called the hero founder phase. She talked about how, in the beginning, a founder has to push and pull and have their hands in every single detail to get the business off the ground. But the problem is, if you want a company to grow beyond a handful of people, you cannot stay in that mode. She warned that you have to let go of that frantic control and the fear of failure that drives micromanagement. What got you to your current stage simply will not get you to the next one.
Which is a really hard transition to make. Mike actually shared the breakthrough that helped him cross that bridge. After losing that third employee, he went to his father, who was his mentor, to complain about the situation. Mike was insisting that the employee wasn't listening and that he, as the boss, was right. His father stopped him and said, "Your job isn't to be right. Your job is to move people."
Wow, that completely reframes the role of a boss. Your job is to move people. And to move people, you have to transition from just managing them to truly leading them. Anita was very passionate about this distinction in your interview. She pointed out that you can manage tools and you can manage processes, but you cannot manage people. You have to guide and inspire them. She strongly dislikes strictly hierarchical organizations, noting that treating employees as subordinates at the bottom of a pyramid might have worked well in the 1800s, but it completely fails with modern knowledge workers.
She went even further, saying that traditional management often creates a toxic parent-child dynamic in the workplace. She argued that we often use middle managers just to make sure people are doing their jobs, rather than treating employees like adults and empowering them to do what we actually hired them to do.
Yes, but here is where it gets really interesting to compare her advice with Mike's. Anita pointed out that if a founder suddenly decides to be collaborative and asks their team for ideas, the room will often go completely silent.
Right, because the team isn't used to it.
Exactly. And as Anita highlighted, people have spent over 20 years in school being trained to be obedient and submissive to the teacher. They are terrified of looking stupid or offending the boss if they speak up. So she advises leaders to build psychological safety by explicitly asking for disagreement. She says you need to stand in front of your team and say, "Here is my idea. Please help me poke holes in this plan before the market does."
That takes a lot of vulnerability, and it ties directly into Mike's approach to decision making. Mike advocates for running stress test simulations with your team, much like the military does. He specifically referenced the kill the company exercise, where you ask your team to put on their competitor hats and figure out every possible way to destroy your own business. By doing this, you're giving them a safe, structured framework to critique the company. And as a leader, you gain invaluable insight into how your team thinks under pressure.
It's a brilliant way to bypass the founder's ego, which Mike correctly identified as a huge barrier. He noted that one of the main things that prevents leaders from adjusting course when a decision goes wrong is their ego, and worrying about what their team will think if they change their mind.
Which brings us to the foundation of all of this: self-awareness. If your team isn't performing, or if your culture feels off, both of our guests said you have to hold the mirror up to yourself first. Anita used a great analogy for founders who feel ashamed that they aren't naturally great leaders. As she said, if you sat in a helicopter and didn't know how to fly it, you wouldn't think you were an idiot. You just haven't learned the skill yet. Leading people is exactly the same. It's a skill you have to deliberately learn.
And Mike gave some very practical advice for cultivating that self-awareness. He suggested really getting to know your own operating states. Are you making a decision from a calm, holistic perspective, or are you acting out of stress? Because when we are stressed, we tend to make highly emotional decisions while trying to convince ourselves we're being logical. He recommended using simple frameworks, checklists, and even just taking a deep breath to pull yourself out of the panic before making a major call.
Now, speaking of tools and frameworks, Louise, there was a fascinating contrast in how these two view modern technology, specifically AI. I asked Mike how AI is affecting businesses, and he actually issued a strong warning. He sees companies over-relying on AI and effectively outsourcing their strategic thinking and decision-making. So he warns that this causes a loss of what he calls organizational knowledge,
Which he defined as third-order knowledge, right? The context of why we are making certain decisions, not just the output itself.
Spot on. If a team just relies on the output of an AI model without understanding the deep human context behind the data, they lose their competitive edge, and eventually the business just becomes a generic vendor with a sameness to every other company out there.
That makes perfect sense, and it really aligns with Anita's personal approach to technology. Even though she runs a modern consultancy, she actually stepped away from complicated apps and funnels to go as lean as possible. She prefers using pen and paper for journaling, pointing out that the human brain processes information and emotions much differently when you write things down by hand versus staring at a screen.
She even runs her sales process that way. No automated funnels, just picking up the phone and having raw, vulnerable human conversations to truly empathize with a potential client's problems. It all comes back to deep, authentic human connection.
It really does. If I had to sum up the core lesson from both of these incredible experts, it's that scaling your business isn't just about scaling your product or your marketing. It's about scaling your own leadership capacity. You have to invest the time to connect with your people, understand your own biases, and build a culture of trust. Because if you don't build that alignment, your people will become a source of friction rather than momentum.
Absolutely. And if you're listening to this and realizing you might be stuck in that hero founder mode, or if you want to learn more about the Kill the Company exercise, you really need to hear these full conversations. There is so much depth, nuance, and practical advice in the original episodes that we simply couldn't fit into this short format.
Definitely. We highly encourage you to seek out and listen to the full interviews with Mike Moorhouse and Anita Čavrag. Just search for ScaleUp Radio wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. And while you're there, make sure you follow or subscribe so you don't miss any of our future episodes and deep dives.
Thanks for tuning in to this Scale Up Radio Short. And remember, if you're tired of ending the week busy, but no further forward, Smart 90 might be for you. It's a 90-day execution rhythm with an AI alignment check that keeps your daily focus tied to what actually matters. Try it free at smart90.co.uk.